Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today I'm very honored to speak with Jeremy. He is one of the experts when it comes to Elastos, and he has a lot more to offer with regard to deep insights into leading projects. Jeremy, you're a friend. You're also someone well and truly well versed in this space. Thanks, mate, for being on the channel today.
Well, thank you, Brad. I'm excited to be doing this video with you. I think we're going to have a fun conversation.
Definitely, and that's the idea of it for all the viewers. Thank you to you as well, because we want to just get real, with regard to what's been happening, particularly of those projects we're talking a lot about, which is Neo, Ontology, obviously Elastos, and maybe touch on a few others as well. But for those who haven't been to Jeremy's channel, it's Blue Collar Crypto. That'll be in the description below, and obviously there's a lot more information available on both our channels. So let's get stuck into it though, mate, and let's have a chat about, I suppose, let's start with Neo, one we both know a bit about. You did a video very recently with regard to Singapore, with consensus, with Da speaking to someone randomly, it seemed, about forking. What happened, mate? What was the go with the statements he was making? What did you think?
Well, so I think we can all agree that it's good that Da's talking, right? And he's communicating with the community. I mean, it's very refreshing. We're getting information. We have something to dissect and unpack and figure out. Now what is being said is that's a whole different ballgame. Because essentially what he said is internally they're discussing a fork, and he used the word fork, and when the community hears fork from Neo, it sets off alarm bells, because the DBFT was designed not to fork, right? So what in the world is he talking about? You know what I mean? Yeah. So that was what my video was about today earlier, and I compared it to Switcheo, because Switcheo a few months back, essentially what they did is they found some bugs in their code and they found some things they wanted to change. So instead of patching it, they had to deploy a new smart contract. And then that involves a token swap and essentially a brand new smart contract. So I'm assuming that that's what Da was talking about, and
but what do you think about the I guess the way in which that information was delivered? Because obviously you and we speak a lot about Neo. It just seems so surprising that it sort of came forth in that manner, especially when it was seen to be something that was so ad hoc.
Right. Yeah. It was out of left field. It was random. That interviewer, he had no clue what he was getting into with that interview. So I mean, we could take it one of two ways. One, they are communicating. I'm thankful that this information is getting out there. That's one. Two, I think they could use a PR class. You know what I mean, on how to drop bombs like those, but at this point, I'm not complaining. I'm glad to know. I'm glad to know. But there are questions about it. There are questions remaining about it. Like, what happens to all the projects built on Neo if they do this? If they do, deploy a new chain, right? So how do the nodes switch over? How do the existing projects switch over? What does the process look like, and how intrusive is it? Because that could really affect the investor community. And I
think, and also if we move right back to the first iterations, or even back to the white paper, literally, if you listen to all the different times when they've spoken, especially Dar on stage, it's always been the spiel of the unforkable consensus system, the unforkable chain. And so again, like as you were saying, it really does thwart the whole premise that there's this strength of trust built in their unforkable design. And like you said as well, I mean, whether is it a back end, is it a front end fork? I mean, what is the specific nature of the fork? What's the and then the next question I wanted to talk to you about is with regard to sharding. There's questions also inbound in that, and whether or not the sharding is going to be involved in the future, because it was always stated that there would be a move towards mass scalability, by 2020. But I'm hearing all kinds of different things. And again, I did want to let you know as well is that I have contacted, since your video, actually, I wrote to Hongfei, I've contacted Malcolm Larita as well. So hopefully through different channels, obviously Chico is doing stuff as well, we will get some of these key answers. But that's the idea, is that we want to be able to represent as much as we can these kinds of concerns for us and for the community, so that we lead that, I guess, community discussion about updates and upgrades and the impact it's going to have on the ecosystem.
Right. I mean, that's the thing is we need clarity, you know, so we're going to need and I get it. They're trying to figure it out because like you guys pointed out in your video yesterday, I mean, at NeoDevCon, it was, you know, we're going to get to, what was it? 10,000 transactions per second, 100,000 on chain without sharding, right? That was their pitch at DevCon. Now we're hearing about all these different avenues and options, which is fine. You know, that's fine. I think they deserve the opportunity to figure it out, you know, and to do it optimally, and we don't need to lock them in and put them in a box. But the key, it always comes back to the communication. And
and I was thinking about that, Jeremy, as well, mate. And I think, you know, often we're in the sort of the position of defense of the statements they're making. And I thought after I discussed that yesterday with Crypto Love and Crypto Zombie, I thought perhaps sometimes it's remiss of the team itself, though, to be on stage and making statements like 100,000 TPS capacity by this certain time, utilizing this kind of technology. I think perhaps they need to explain and put a disclaimer when they do speak that this is one option. Because it seemed at that time at NeoDevCon that it was quite a sort of finite statement. You know, it was it was almost an absolute. That's how they would approach it. That's just not the case. And so now what I would love to sort of explore for all of us is that really the truth is that even Hongfei himself and Larita, they're working through this literal mathematical equation, this problem, and they're looking at all the different options on the table. And that I think coming to the fore now is that they're letting people know that there are perhaps better technologies, because at the end of the day, people create the technology and that evolves over time. And that means that, you know, new innovations come forth beyond the stage of NeoDevCon at that time.
Yeah. And like I said, I am all about giving them the freedom and the autonomy and the sort of room to figure it out. You know, it's just sometimes I feel like, and I don't know, you might too, but I feel like I'm trying to interpret hieroglyphics, you know, from what comes out of the team or Malcolm or Da. And it's like, we have to sort it out and dissect it. You know what I mean? And present that to the community as here's what's going on. So it can be tricky. You know? It's
almost like we are trying to decode complex ciphers or something. But let's talk about that. You did a really good video recently, and I do watch your content, mate. It's excellent. And you were talking a little bit about basically how it was Larita's comments about enterprise were a little bit confusing. And I totally understand. And I was trying to reference this yesterday because, you know, for many different, for months now, it's always been our understanding that Neo is focused on the data aspect, particularly digital assets. They're a single vertical. But here Larita is saying something new. And he's saying that enterprise is the next wave, the next focus for Neo. So what were you thinking about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that threw me for a loop, to be honest with you, because I had in my head, this is how I had it sorted out as the difference between Neo and Ontology was Neo was the public chain and Ontology was the enterprise train. You know what I mean? So and not only did he say that Neo was pursuing enterprise in Neo 3.0 in this next phase, but he put it this way, that Neo was for digital assets and Ontology was for data exchange. Those are his words. You know, that's almost a direct quote. So I have to admit, I'm still unclear. You know, I'm still unclear, and I'll even take it back a step. When we talk about enterprise application, okay, a couple thoughts on this, right? One, we still don't have working dApps. We still don't have decentralized applications on a retail user public level that anybody uses, right? That anybody uses. So in my mind, enterprise application is a cut above. It's almost the next step. And maybe in some ways it's not, but maybe in some ways it is. But I'm thinking, one, if we can't get working dApps that people are actually using, what does enterprise application actually take and involve, and how does that process of adoption look like? Because when you're entering into business, you're entering into permission-based, you know, levels, and essentially then you have to address the issue of how is this better than a centralized database, right? You know, how is this more efficient? You know, so I'm still getting my brain around what businesses are going to use these. you know, and what does that even mean, enterprise application? What
Well,
does it, because
I think that's the really big point. I don't mean to cut you off, but I think you're raising so much we could talk about.
Sure.
And with enterprise, I was like you when I first started hearing those terms, especially in the days of on-chain, and bringing that forward in trying to sort of compare Neo in comparison to on-chain. But what I've learned since is that enterprise itself, it doesn't always mean permissioned. It doesn't always mean privatized. And as you know, with the DNA system of on-chain, that does. I mean, that was born in this idea of trying to bridge basically private business and bring that into the blockchain technology. But I think when they talk about blockchain, having spoken with Ontology recently, and obviously with Neo, is that they're actually thinking it in a broader scope. So, you know, we talk about dApps, for example, that could actually be in part that enterprise conversation if you think about it, because if they mean enterprise as business, because Neo and Ontology both run on different public blockchains, it's possible that they are basically trying to utilize the technology itself to build out business. And from my understanding, the key and asset of both Neo and Ontology is that they are public. So if you harp back to on-chain, for example, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but they were designed to be permissioned, and you're totally right. They're literally trying to be that conduit for the ecosystem itself to basically allow for these companies and enterprises to build their own blockchains using the toolbox that they offered. But I think what Malcolm's saying now is that he wants to allow Neo to do something like that, but in a public chain setting, so that you can offer that in to public businesses of both pre-existing, firstly in China, I would imagine, and build out globally, and then others. So in that respect, if you think of it, some of the dApps that are going on board in the system are not going to be new. They're going to be systems where they're already existing enterprises, but they're centralized enterprises. They're centralized businesses that might, you know, run through the new ecosystem of the public chain. That is definitely what Ontology is doing, and we can talk about that later. But if Malcolm's thinking along the same lines, I think that it could actually really benefit them. So, yeah, I think the conversation and the bifurcation of permission and permissionless, it was originally valid, but now I think it's more of the melding. It's more looking at it and going, okay, how is Neo going to actually work in the system to make sure they have revenue, to make sure they're not lost in translation because they want to be entirely purely decentralized. That is not, I don't think that's their objective. I think they want to move more in the direction of like an Ontology-like model. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, at least in my mind, I think it will be very helpful when we start to see some of these enterprise applications come forth. So then we have examples, then we have something to point to. Because right now it's enterprise application, it's buzzwords and it's vague and it's, you know, it needs to be more concrete, I think, for the layperson to really become real. You know, we could talk about applying, you know, blockchain solutions to enterprises all day long, but show me something. You know what I mean? Show me one. So
exactly.
That's what I'm really waiting for. But I want to ask you this while we're on this topic. Can you explain to me and to the viewers once and for all, okay, what, in your own words, what the difference is between Neo and Ontology? Okay.
Okay. I can do that. Yeah. I can try.
Try.
In a super simple way. I guess the buzzword for me, excuse me, is modularization, and that's a tough word. So I'll just break it down and say both are public chains. So big tick on the sameness there. But the big difference is Ontology is trying to build out modules to allow for businesses to build their own blockchains.
Okay.
Neo is not trying to do that. So the big difference is that both are in one sense the same, because they have that public chain ambition to build out a platform. But one of them is, again, going next level and trying to allow for being a toolkit for other businesses to basically use their technology to build out their own capacity. And that can be in three ways. It could be a consortium, it could be a private blockchain or private company, or it could be a public one. So that's their really big focus. And right now, up until now, and that could change, Neo's not trying to do that particular thing.
Okay. So in your mind, that's the key difference.
Well, it took me a long time to understand, because initially you know, initially I thought, oh, okay, it's a government system. It's designed
Right.
to be a cross-chain, cross-compatible, cross everything, and that is truly what it's doing. It's interacting. It's a platform for basically all different parties to come together to enable trust to happen. Obviously, that's important for smart contracts. Again, there's another similarity of the dual token systems that they have. So there's a lot of similarities and a lot of things that both of them are building that support each other. And the other thing to remember too is, I don't want to digress about the similarities, but this is a big one. They are going to basically come together and they are going to make new standards that are collaborative for smart contracts. So that's happening right now. Like, that's literally brand new for their plan. So that's kind of cool. But if you take it back again to the big difference, and that is literally while NEO is trying to plan out their next step, Ontology is already so far ahead in terms of already bridging the business world of basically, imagine a whole line of businessmen wearing their suit and tie, knocking on Ontology's door. This is what they've been doing. And these represent big businesses, small businesses. They all want to convert their systems into a more blockchain-based design. And so what Ontology is doing is it's opening the door to that potential and then working with them in a customized way to allow that to happen. Whereas from my understanding, that's not what NEO is doing. They're more of a single vertical focused, as you said, on digital assets. They're also providing for an ICO platform. But here's the interesting question. Why are they also opening the doors to similar dApps? You know, dApps of like design, like, for example, that music one is one small example. That is something that was a bit of a, you know, a curveball to me. But I hope that helps a little bit.
It does. And I have never heard it explained that way to date, you know, from any of the team members or anybody. So thank you for that. So that brings us to the next, in my mind, if you don't mind, are they, in a sense, competitors? Can you call them competitors? And let me throw this out there, okay? Are we, when you think big picture, right, are there going to be two different ecosystems? Is there going to be a NEO ecosystem and an Ontology ecosystem? You know,
I just love talking to you because, you know, we can go to this kind of level. I think that there's two answers to that. There's going to be an overarching ecosystem. And that's, I even also said to Li Jun and Hongfei is that it's almost an unnamed ecosystem, you know, because the reason is that Hongfei himself, he has an interest in all the different parts of this system. But the thing is that underneath that, there are these, I wouldn't call them microcosms. They are their own public chain ecosystems with their own intentions, their own teams, everything. So in every way, I couldn't be clearer than say they're distinct. They are literally their own companies, and they're community driven in different ways. But the thing is, though, that there is always going to be commonalities, or there's going to be threads that bind and bridge them. And that's what sets them apart from every other, you know, design that comes forward in the future in terms of whether they're similar or not. These two have a special connection. And as I mentioned, the standardized smart contract plan is just one. And if you think of it, in it, just from a common sense standpoint, if you have someone like Hongfei, who's basically, you know, involved directly in on-chain ontology and in NEO in some respect, and that means obviously an investment standpoint, he is literally going to ensure, I would imagine and assume, that these are going to be more collaborative by design. But in terms of the leadership, honestly, Jeremy, the thing is that Hongfei is not leading Ontology. I mean, we've talked about that before. He is not intending and stepping on the feet of Li Jun. Li Jun is leading that with his team. They have a really strong plan.
He's not migrating over. He's not leaving NEO to go to Ontology. You know, the developers aren't fleeing NEO to jump in the Ontology shit.
No, I mean, there may have been some who wanted to transition over, you know, from a personal standpoint. But from what Larita has explained to me, and also Li Jun, is that, you know, internally, and this really was quite profound for me, is that Li Jun explained that when he was talking about Ethereum, he said one of the big differences for Ontology is that they have one of the largest internal engineering teams in the world.
Their core team's huge. It's huge.
It's immense. And if you
Yes.
compare that to Ethereum, it's really different. And even Neo,
Right.
if you compare it.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
that's the other thing too, is that these other two projects are so community driven and so
Right.
reliant on the external innovations of entities like the COZ, or in Ethereum's case, you see the EEA of merge, and you see other core devs.
Yeah.
But essentially, the prominence of the internal team of Ontology is just so much more powerful comparatively to almost anything out there. And that's
Yeah.
really, again, another thing that has to be acknowledged when we talk about the bridging aspect of enterprise, because
Right.
there's no way the Ontology could do what they want to at the scale in which they want to do it if they didn't have this kind of team. And it really helps explain and understand the different sort of focus that they're taking. They are not taking the position of pure decentralization. That is not what Ontology is about, not in any way. They are actually trying to use blockchain as another mechanism to be, really profitable and to make money on the blockchain. And they don't like to talk about it, but that's the truth.
Right.
This is China. China is a place that loves to really capitalize on technology. And that's exactly what Ontology is trying to do.
Right. Yeah. So their focus is more on making businesses more efficient and thus more profitable, rather than this idealistic, we're going to be decentralized, this autonomous driven engine. That's not.
Yeah, and it took me a while to support that, because when I first started in blockchain, I was a proponent of the pure decentralized model. But to be honest with you, I think there's inherent problems in that, because it's not sustainable.
Right. That's right.
Not from a business standpoint. And I think Ontology is leading the way for the potential of sustainability for their own books, I suppose, that they'll be around, I think, for a long time, because the way they're approaching this is, allowing for them to generate revenue beyond, and because they're new, this is something to remember as well. They didn't come from another company themselves, like many of the businesses that are onboarding now. And they'd be encouraging other businesses to already have revenue, so they don't need things like an ICO. They can just transition using the tech. And the other thing too, I wanted to mention to you is, when I spoke to Li Jung, to answer one of your questions, is that he literally told me that there are some big companies already making that transition into Ontology. So you are right. We need to know exactly who. And he said that they'll be released over time. Those big companies that are making that transition using the toolkit.
Yeah. So, I mean, they have a very practical approach as opposed to the more idealistic vision of decentralization and that utopian kind of thing, which I appreciate that. And honestly, while we're having this conversation, you're selling me on Ontology.
I'm not trying to.
I may go grab some after we're done here. So, but serious topic though. What would you say you're more bullish on? Would you say you're more bullish on Neo or Ontology at this point?
Well, to be fair, I mean, I want to be really transparent. I mean, one of the first investments I ever made, and I will say investment because at the time that's what it was Neo. Yep. So I don't want to cause any FUD and say one is better than the other, but I will say this. I'll say that the use cases for both Neo and Ontology are very different right now. And I am really bullish on enterprise. And the reason being is that, as you said, like, we'd like to see more of it. But to me, I'm just going from a common sense standpoint. I want to see technology be practical, be pragmatic, but also be relevant for building out, I guess, money. I want to see something that can actually make money utilizing technology. And for me, I think Ontology is doing the best of that right now between the two. So I won't say that I'm more bullish on Ontology, but I would say that it's certainly on my radar to really pay attention to those that are trying to not just scale and not trying to, have the highest TPS, but go much farther than that and prove to me that they have real use case.
Yeah, that's a great point. And listen, when we talk about dApps being adopted and people actually picking them up and using them, I mean, if you want to put that into hyperdrive, if you build a mechanism or you build a dApp or something that will save a business 70% on its data costs or firmware upgrades or name it, businesses are going to start using them. You know what I mean? That's speaking their language, and it's going to hit the market and be picked up and adopted very, very quickly.
And the thing is too, imagine if some of these companies already have millions or if not billions of dollars of revenue that are knocking on these doors of Ontology, for example. And
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do. you know.
Yeah, and given that, I mean, I hope to see that there's less reliance on fundraising because they don't need it, you see. So that's really exciting as well, is that the transition can be more seamless in that respect as we build out, you know, like the next decade of potential utilizing this new technology. And again, I like the analogy of the toolkit and the auto shop, because if you imagine, really, ontology functions like that, where these cars come in, get an upgrade sometimes, or they might be building the car with the company themselves or based on a customized plan, whatever it is, how they leave that auto shop is so much sexier. It's so much better, you know. And I think that's one thing that really does, from an analogy standpoint, set these two apart right now. Neo is building a different kind of system. They aren't necessarily advocating for the drive-in, drive-out model. You know, they're building something a little bit more internally to drive innovation. And to also, to be honest, I want to talk about this as well. Right now, there's still indecisions within the camp of Neo as to how they're going to do this, I think. Whereas Ontology, in my opinion, for a long time, have been just so rock solid on their view and their vision. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I'm ready to go pick some up.
I might too after this. Because you know, I tend to talk a lot, but I don't tend to invest enough. Yeah, but I mean, it's such a privilege to be able to talk at this level and really just unpack things in a way that perhaps is useful for the audience as well. And in that respect, I wanted to talk to you about the virtual machines as well, and the imperative, the MOUs, for example. And Larita said, if we want to talk a little bit more about some of the synergies, that right down to the contractual level, there are aspects of obligations Ontology has for Neo. And that's because the chronology started with on-chain, moved to Neo, then went to Ontology. So in that respect, there are some sort of requisites or some, agreements that Ontology has to follow to comply with the expectations that Neo, Hongfei, and the on-chain teams have. And so in that respect, again, it reinforces this overarching entity, the unnamed, that supports them all.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, you could almost look at Neo as the predecessor, you know, in some way. And I would imagine that creates some kind of friction, or just it's just an interesting relational dynamic, you know. And another thing that I'll point out that Malcolm said in his interview when he talked about the MOU, he said something to the effect, and quote me if I'm wrong, but if they don't play nice, we'll break it.
He did say that,
you know, and that I was like, whoa, that
caught me
by, that kind of took me by surprise, and it's, you know, it made a statement. A statement that we could be a grown up, we could be our own thing if we want to be. You know?
Yeah, I think it was a big wake up call. If anyone from Ontology had watched that, and hopefully they did, I think it would have really raised the eyebrows at the time. It certainly did me when I watched it. Because initially, I was thinking more that Ontology is, I guess, the core tree, let's say, as an analogy, and then, you know, there are two major taproots that come forth from that. You know, one being Neo, one Ontology. And both being public blockchains. But the reality is, from what Larita has said, it's not quite like that, you know, and that in many ways, Neo wears the decision pants for certain aspects of Ontology. So I like that because, again, that reinforces what we're talking about in the sense of governance, degrees of control, and even boardroom. I mean, at the end of the day, he was implying by saying that he has the authority to decree certain controls. And I mean, if you talk to Li Jung, he would argue against that. He would say, no, we're completely distinct, we're completely separate. But clearly, these synergies that move in the direction of on-chain matter. And that also affords for more confidence in me to say that they're not in competition. They can never technically be, because of this kind of evidence, this empirical evidence we're seeing come forward. If it was something where, you know, we didn't have someone like Hongfei and on-chain behind them, I would be worried, because I would say, yes, there must be competitors, you know, directly. But I think the competition is still there, but it's more indirect. And again, the responses I've had from both camps is that we're still going to advance, you know, in the directions we want to go in. Sometimes that's going to collide, but the implicit intention is to collaborate.
Right. And I mean, at this point, there's plenty of room to run. you know, for both of them and for others. So I don't foresee it being an issue, you know, the competition thing for years, you know, for the next few years at least. So I just don't think it's something that we need to be worried about as a community right now. You know what I mean? In my mind, let them both run full speed ahead and go after whatever they can. You know what I mean?
And even from a technological standpoint, if you look at the complexities of ontology, they are already in their own zone. I mean, because of their modularized nature, because they're focused on, you know, the DID system, they're focused on, you know, a multitude. I mean, it could go on and on. And I would encourage people to go and look at the different layers they've built out. I think even right down to the virtual machine itself, they are going to extend capacity. They're going to broaden scope, not limit it, not stifle, and certainly not stifle Neo either. In fact, I really believe that ontology will facilitate the growth of Neo and not the other way around.
Well, and that's a different way of looking at it, and I think a smart way of looking at it. You know, they can, and I think that's how DA and internally, I think that's their position, is we can help each other grow. We can kind of feed off of each other's momentum, you know, and push through certain areas, and I think they can grow together. You know, they can grow together and almost faster, almost more rapidly, working off of each other than they would if one were just to exist.
Well, speaking of growth, I wanted to ask you, what was your take on the way in which Neo's declined in value substantially, you know, in the last, I'm not sure what time frame it would be, just, you know, the last few months particularly. What was your thinking about the cause of that, the problems, you know, you see with Neo in the past?
Yeah, I mean, my take honestly is that it's 90% communication. You know, that's how I mean, well, no, let me back up, because a big part of it is the market, obviously. You know, every project's down. They're all, you know, whether, and this is a criticism I have of the whole space, is that whether or not you're a garbage project or super high quality, it's all moving together. You know, we haven't been able to sift and to sort out the quality from the junk, because this stuff shouldn't all be moving together. Some of them should be dying and faster than they're dying now, and others should be holding their value much better. But unfortunately, everything's tied together and everything's down 70 to 90%. So that's a big part of it, you know. But on the side that they can control, that they have discretion over, I think it's mainly communication, at least to the West, to the Western investors. Those are my viewers, you know what I mean? And I think that we feel this frustration, like we've been neglected, so to speak, and not communicated with, not, you know, just that's the issue. And I think that's why they've lost positioning. You know, they not only went down in value, they've lost positioning. They were ranked, you know, 5 or 6 at one point. Now they're down at 15. You know, so I would attribute it to that.
And I think you would agree as well. Often you see some of the best, you know, arguably the best technology and the best teams that lead that technology neglect the imperatives of the sentiment-driven system, you know, and really allowing for people to engage in that. And I think we've seen a little bit of evidence of that. And I totally agree. There can be a lot more done. And Larita has actually stated that. So in fairness, they've acknowledged this is a problem, and they are now, as you've said, they're starting to come out of the cave again, you know, into the light. And it's so important, in my opinion, that we have the charismatic leader of Hongfei. He is also very savvy when it comes to technology. And then we have a core technologist like Larita. They have to come and do more. They have to bring it beyond what they've ever done if they really want to ensure that people are informed and then can retain the kind of faith and trust in their investments. But I also think that when you have, you know, this architecture that we've been discussing, and you have the arising of a new project like Ontology, there's no doubt that people would be considering that that's some sort of Neo 2.0. And so that's, again, what we want to hit on you know, we want to quash that kind of idea, because it's just not the case. They are different. And if you are investing in Neo and you want to support their utility and ecosystem, that's what you're doing. You're also you're not going into Ontology by default, or vice versa. So again, that's why I would be, personally, I would look at them, and I would look at them for the long term and then decide on how I'm going to approach them based on my own analysis. I'm not going to ever, despite their synergies, decide that perhaps I should transition from one to the other. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that a part of the issue would be, because we've been in a bear market for the past 9 months or whatever, the pool of money is limited, right? There hasn't been any new money coming in on a retail level, right? So essentially it's retail investors, if they're doing anything, they're moving money from one place to another. And, it's a very, it's a very just obvious move, to just shift your investment from Neo to Ontology, because Ontology's new, you know what I mean? It's sexier right now. It's got more buzz around it, So I think there was a little bit of that going on, and just some retailers not doing their research a little bit. That to me seems like a seamless move that I'm not surprised that they caught that momentum. And I think not even in a bull market, in a normal market, it wouldn't be an issue. But I think it's been so apparent because the tide is out, so to speak.
And is it also because we're seeing now new projects that are non-blockchain? There's a lot of argument that some of the new technologies are also advancing so rapidly. Is it possible that, given that the market is so illiquid, given that there are so many investors that are sort of cycling through different projects, one would argue that perhaps, again, the interest is just moving sideways sometimes? For example, if we talk about Hashgraph, again, it is a block lattice design. It's not utilizing the same technology. If we go across to Holochain, another example, I'm not raising these for any reason at all, but just simply to state, is it possible that there's also a bit of shopping going on among those who are already in the system, because there's such a lack of liquidity that they're trying to capitalize through and not really stay for the long term in projects? Is that a problem?
I do. Yes, I think so. I think that's the very same issue. It's the pool is limited. It's a fixed amount of money right now that's kind of moving around in circles because, let's face it, we get bored, and we're looking for something to happen somewhere. So, all right, let's try block lattice. Let's try the DAGs. Let's try, you know what I mean? So I think that, and here's the thing, market sentiment shifts on a dime. I mean, we saw today, look at today, and how bullish everybody gets. So I think that this issue takes care of itself, and I'm not too concerned about it. But I
guess I wanted to ask you though, Jeremy, is that, are we talking about a money-driven system? A monetary, obviously everything is driven by economies that have to survive. But are people making these decisions based on monetary gain as opposed to technological innovation for the future? I think it's a fair point to ask, because if you discuss something like, for example, Icon or Neo, I genuinely would argue that these two are legitimate long-term projects. Sure. And people don't seem to like that term long-term, because it implies perhaps a 10x long-term, I'm not saying either of these projects are going to do that. I want to make that clear, but I'm saying that it's not something that people want to hear.
Yeah, it's not, you're right. And long-term, words like long-term and words like patience, are bad words in this world, and that's unfortunate, in my head, that's when I try to trade, I'll just say it. When I try to trade, I get wrecked every time. I just do. When I try to make, I do. I get wrecked. If I try to make fast moves and accumulate BTC, I get sucked in. I get bull trapped. I'm terrible. I'm terrible.
It's not easy to do. It's not easy to do because you've got to hope for a fall in the market to capitalize on that.
I mean, it's hard. You're fighting. You're resisting your emotions. You're trying to be contrarian, and I just can't do it. And I'll be the first to admit it. But I think everybody comes, or most people come to the blockchain space, come to the crypto space for the money. I mean, that's the lure. That's the sparkly, shiny thing that's why I started. That's most people. Some are just tech nerds and they love the technology, and that's why they're here. But I think most people come for the money. But when you start, there's a transition. So when you start to look into these projects, I mean, this is what happened with me and Elastos. I started to look into it and dig deep and be like, man, this thing can change the world. This thing can, and make it a better place. I mean, we're talking about recreating the infrastructure of the internet, and building an internet of wealth and turning every piece of content into an asset. I mean, you sort of get captivated. You know what I mean? And then I think this is important, and I think a lot of investors miss this. You plug in and you connect, you join the community. You know, you engage the community and you join the community and you meet the people, not just the team, but the people, the investors, the Telegram group. You know what I mean? And you make friends with them. Then it becomes much easier, in my opinion, to stop thinking about the price every day. You know, stop racking your brain over the short-term movements. And you're planted, you know, you're there for the long term. And the people,
I couldn't agree more. It's almost like you're switching codes from looking at the startups, as in like almost looking at the numerical data, and suddenly you move across to more of the narrative. You come to understand exactly what they're trying to do, and it's a bit like when you go to a newspaper, for example, and you're looking at the different Wall Street companies, and often there's all this really technical data that you see, but it doesn't really tell you much. And so it's a bit like that. We are looking at crypto in the same way initially, perhaps many of people, and then they're moving across, if they are move beyond that, into asking the deeper questions of, okay, how are they actually going to make this happen for the long term? How are they sustainable? What's their business model? And that's the thing that you've done with Elastos. It's certainly been my approach right from the outset, to my own detriment financially, because I've always wanted to know more about how these companies are actually going to work. What's their true technological engine? But I agree with you. I think more and more people are moving and making that transition across, because at the end of the day, there's nothing worse than not doing enough DD or due diligence and then suffering because of it, because you've invested in something from a speculative standpoint and had no idea, and then it's just gone to total shit.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, my advice that I give people and try to sort of preach on my channel, you know, one is don't diversify. I tell people not to diversify in this space, you know, and that's conventional wisdom in traditional markets, is diversify and spread it around lots of different sectors and industries. But I don't think that's good, because I think 95% of these things are going down.
So
you know, 90+% are going down, and they need to, and the sooner the better, in my opinion. So you don't want to be diversified and have 90% of your investments go down. And then, you know, like the bear market, everybody talks about using your time in the bear market and doing your research and digging in, reading white papers, and that's great, and absolutely, by all means, do that. But what I'm saying is also join communities. Find a few projects. It doesn't have to be a lot. You know, find a few projects that you love, and it's whatever you love. It could be Neo, Ontology, Elastos. I mean, pick something that you love and engage it. Engage the community. You know what I mean? And most of these projects, like we could talk about Elastos with the Cyber Republic, but most of these projects need help. They need help. You know, whether it's you know, organizing local meetups, or on the development side, if you're a developer, or marketing, you know, they just need help, because they have these grand visions, right? They have these huge grand visions, and it's kind of like all hands on deck, you know? So I'm all about being active in communities.
Me too. And I would take it one step further as well, Jeremy, especially for those people who haven't yet done the kinds of things where they've really done their research and they've moved into one that they sort of can connect with. What I would love to say is that don't just simply go into community that you have an affinity with, especially when it's sentiment driven. Go into it based on really deep and profound research that makes sense to you from a business frame. Because if you go in with any other mentality, you can easily get sucked in, I think, into the hype of the project, into once again, into, I guess, the narrative of potential. And that to me is not enough. I want to see empirical evidence already existent that this company actually can do something. And the word utility gets thrown around a lot, and it's misused so much. Right now, you are exactly right. There's not enough utility in the space in terms of provability. But at the end of the day, there are two things I'm really looking for right now. Aside from the typical things of, you know, your team and your partnerships and all of that, what I'm really looking for is, how much capital do they have if they're moving from a traditional business model in? Do they even need an ICO in that sense? Can they transition? Or if they do need to do an ICO to raise capital, I want to know exactly what the expenditure plan is. That doesn't happen. I want to know, you know, what they want to, why they want to do things, and I want them to communicate that, and then I want to back that up with talking to other people, talking to professors, you know, whoever I can, to verify that and this is why we do the interviews. This is why we do all of that, because that is first source, that is primary source information that we can't test and we can't invent.
Yeah. Yeah. And listen, I think you're absolutely right. I think that there needs to be accountability. Absolutely. Especially with these guys coming out of the gate in their ICOs. I mean, somebody has to play sheriff, right? And somebody has to ask the questions and ask, what are you, how much do you really need this much money? What is your plan to use it? Do you really even need your own coin? That's another question I think we need to be asking. Why can't you just use the main chain's coin? And that would be more beneficial to their ecosystem, to the bigger picture, and simpler, frankly. I mean, the short answer is, the simple answer is they're releasing their own coin because they want to do an ICO and raise $25 million. And that's far too often the case. I mean, right now, God forbid, if you do an ICO on Ethereum, God forbid it's something people would actually use. Because if people actually use it, it'll crash the chain.
Well, let's talk about that for a sec. Like, obviously there are different industries or different sectors that are more likely to have that potential for mass adoption first. So which ones are you thinking, in your experience, that have the best potential to utilize the technologies afforded by blockchain to, I guess, make the transition more seamlessly and more readily and more, I guess, in a shorter period of time, rather than
which dApps are you saying, or which platform?
Probably more in the sense of industry. Like, for example, just to throw one out there, gaming is one that's a buzzword.
Right. Yeah.
But I want to try and talk to you more about what you think and why you think perhaps some of these industries more likely will come to the fore first.
Well, listen. I mean, the industry, or the sector that I think is used the most currently, are the exchanges, are the decentralized exchange. I mean, those are really if you look at IDEX and Switch.io, now you have Next coming out. Like, those are things that you could argue are being used at least a little bit, and as these ecosystems are built out, now you need other dApps built that are being used in order to trade those tokens. But as these ecosystems are built out, and hopefully that comes, I think those play a pillar. Those are a pillar in the whole infrastructure. So I like exchanges. I do.
So
and I would argue that, the token can be necessary and can have use if you're getting, if you're getting a cheaper fee or cheaper rate on it. You know what I mean? It's
or if
kind
you're
of
getting
like
rewards as well. Like some of the new
right.
ones coming forward are actually rewarding the users, moving beyond the Binance model. Which
right.
to be totally frank, needs to change. I mean, it's just too expensive for different parties, including the projects themselves. I was never a fan of the amount of money that they were charging. It was often too, for those who are already struggling. And imagine what it's like for them now as the markets pull back so much. Imagine the losses that they've incurred, those projects, because of the cost they've already had to pay out for, say, someone like Binance. It's just too much. It's a whole kitty. It's
absolutely too much. And that's another, we've talked about the ICOs and sort of the mess with ICOs. We've talked personally about influencers and how, there's nonsense going on there.
Yeah.
You could also talk about the exchanges, and that's basically a shakedown, to get listed on. And let's talk about Binance. I mean, they're the big dog, and their fee. I mean, listen, and these days it used to be you get listed on Binance, you get a huge pump that lasted at least for a few days. Now it's a 3-hour pump you get.
And that's a big problem, because once again, it reinforces the hierarchy of those who are dumping. So that's the other thing too, is that I agree with you, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but as we move into the more, like, the better quality centralized ones that afford for rewards and incentivized systems for us as users, I think you're going to see, again, a bit of a change in this tiered, unjust system where you see seed investors, often they're VCs or they're privileged parties who can go on 10x while, somebody else is suffering because they're the ones that are copping the loss, as they dump. I want to see trust built in, and the only way is, gradual change, like you're saying with these exchanges.
Yeah. So I think those have the best shot. If we want to talk about sectors that I see leading the way, I'm very excited to see the actual next product I'm very, you know, I'm excited to get in there, use it, trade some tokens, see how the user interface is, the user experience. That's very important. But
and
you
given
know,
that there is security as well, that's also another thing we could talk about is the STOs are coming. They're coming strong, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with, you know, in the space as well. And the fact that Next went ahead and did such rigorous work to be recognized officially and legally as a security, that's something I think.
That is something. They pioneered, they got the breakthrough, they pushed through that. It took longer than we all wanted to, but it is noteworthy, and they deserve credit for that. Absolutely.
Right. But let's talk about that for a sec with regard to the OTC. You mentioned this recently.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Because it just doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't fit the bill.
It's ironic. It's ironic that, I mean, if you go, there's Telegram groups that are OTC Telegram groups, you know, and you see it even on Twitter, but it's, you know, it's all the rage right now. It's the hot thing is to trade OTC on a retail level. We're talking 100 tokens of, you know, 500 tokens, but to trade Next OTC because it's not listed on any exchanges, you know, it's just.
But what does that say about the confidence they have about the token? That's the thing I wonder. Why on earth would someone OTC something that they think is going to have the value in the future?
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to flip it. That's what's going on. They're trying to flip, and they're only selling. I mean, if they bought it for $1, I think they're selling it for like $1.25 or something like that. Last I checked, so they're trying to make a quick 25%. So
once again, it's just trading.
It's a flip. That's what it is. It's a flip, and trading. I mean, I think what I think people are doing, and I didn't look too closely at it, is they got their bag, they filled their bag up, and if that's whatever that is for them and their situation is, so they bought 5,000 of them to hold, and then they're trying to flip the rest.
Well, the same thing's happening behind the scenes, no doubt, with a lot of the ICOs too. You know, those who are capitalizing early on, some of them are no doubt doing the same thing with their OTCing and capitalizing on that. And that's the thing. You know, people like you and I, what we want to do is just bring as much transparency to the system, because at the end of the day, we want to see a very robust, a very liquid marketplace that's for the long term. The only way we can build this collectively as a group of people in the crypto community is with the imperative of trust behind it. It has to be the backbone. And I think that it's going to be more and more trustable. And that's the irony, is that, again, we're supposed to be building and supporting a trustless system. But in fact, there are implicit requisites of trust that must be that people can know when they, you know, take part in the ecosystem, that they're going to be treated fairly. And that doesn't, and equitably, you know, and that doesn't always mean equally, because that is not the real world of business anywhere in any part of history. But I think the transparency of how everything operates must be always brought to the fore. And that's certainly my premise all the time, is just being real. So if I invest in something, I'm going to say it. If I, you know, if I see something, I'm going to call it. But it's always a risky business in this space. I can tell you that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've paid the price. You know, here's the thing. We have, in this space, we have a lot of tailwinds. We have a lot working for us. I mean, this is revolutionary technology. It's a brand new asset class. I mean, the demographics, the fact that it's so popular with the young people, next generation. I mean, we have all kinds of tailwinds, right? But what has really hurt us, and what has really come to the forefront and into the spotlight in these past 9 months, is the corruption, and what you're saying, the lack of transparency. You know, it's people doing stuff in the dark.
The blockchain bullshit.
Right. That's right. And that's, you know, it's really put a stranglehold, I think, on the market. And we feel it. We've felt it, you know, these past, to the point where I'm sick of it. I'm sick.
So am I. And that's why it's just time for transparency. It's time for us to get real with projects. I mean, you know, from all of your due diligence, and we'll talk about that in a moment with regard to all the things you learned about Elastos. I mean, you went to Thailand, you've been part of that anniversary experience, and you've had key insights. That's what we need. We need the understanding. We need the technological savvy to make decisions that are going to, not just for the long term either. I mean, I'm talking also about short-term gains. They can be much more valuable, that kind of knowledge, for making decisions for each person's personal, you know, portfolios, you know, however they decide to, you know, interact in that. I still believe very strongly that the information is the real power behind anything that we do in crypto.
Absolutely. And there's no better antidote than bringing things into the light. You know what I mean? Once, if there's transparency, if there's exposure to this stuff, it tends to heal once it comes in the light. But I do want to ask you, where do you come down? What are your thoughts on regulations?
I'm going to be really honest, and again, it's just my view, but I'm really bullish on it. I'm a proponent of regulation, and the reason is because when I first went in, again, as I was saying, I was a real proponent. I was quite naive. I was someone who wanted to see the world change from blockchain. I wanted to see the middleman removed, all of this kind of stuff. Right. And I think it was more along the lines of the narrative of the Nakamoto protocol. And to be fair to that, there is literally no single project out there in the crypto world that reflects that. Nothing is that completely decentralized. And so now my position is more to ensure the transparency, to ensure the viability and the longevity of the whole ecosystem. I believe that the SEC, I believe that the regulation measures for different countries must happen. Because again, what it does is it protects the interest of the user. It gives them a roadmap. Right now, we don't have a roadmap. We don't have a legal system, and we have a lot of corruption because of that. So I want to stifle the bullshit, and I want to bring to the fore more of the benevolence and more of the goodness of the system itself.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm also a proponent of it. My question would be on what level and who are the regulators? Is it going to be the SEC and these government entities? Is there a way that we can self-regulate? You know what I mean? Is there a way that the space can kind of police itself? Because a lot of people don't want to hear it, and community members and retail investors, they're anti. You know what I mean? We don't want the government involved. We don't want to be regulated. We're crypto. You know what I'm saying?
To be honest, I don't think we're ever going to remove ourselves from the equation, and I actually want it to do that. Like, I'm going to be really bold and say I do want top level, and I want grassroots movement, and I want grassroots innovation. But I really believe that if there isn't this reciprocity between top-down measures and grassroots innovation, then I think both are going to be stifled. And that seems ironic, and it seems like it doesn't really even make sense. But the reason is because right now, that's all being marred by the corruption of the grey right now. If we can clarify things, make them clear and finite, I really believe, just like in transitions from the history of the internet, for example, we're going to see, even they tried to put measures in to really stifle innovation at some points, as different technologies have come to the fore. But once again, I don't see a problem in trying to control some of the inherent problems. I mean, if it's to the point where it really stifles innovation, obviously I wouldn't be a proponent. But right now, I actually see innovation being stifled. What I mean by that is I have talked to so many projects that have really suffered because they haven't been able to capitalize on the hype side, on the marketing side that is an imperative for blockchain. And so their thinking was, if we're really good, if we're diligent and we have good technology, we'll be fine. But that's just not the case. And that's again because sometimes hype underpins hype, and there's no real tech at all. It's all bullshit. But it does very well, and then it goes away. But the members of that original that seed investor team or that cornerstone, they run away all the way to the bank and they celebrate. And that's just not good enough that can happen. And so I want someone to not be the dictator, but be a mediator, be a mechanism for innovation. And I don't think the ideal route is going to work. I don't think that it can. It hasn't ever in history, and I don't think it will work in this case. I think we actually need some sort of governance system.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, if we look at, if you just look at the case in point, so we haven't been allowed to invest in ICOs in the U.S., right? And throughout the whole bull market, everybody had a lot of angst and, government in the way and I can't get in, I'm a U.S. citizen, right? But now when you look back on it and you realize 90+% of those ICOs were scams, not even just crappy projects, scams, then it's like, maybe they were looking out for us. Maybe that was a wise regulation. And they said, we're just trying to protect the retail investors. Well, that's exactly what Jeremy, they were doing.
You couldn't have said it better. And the thing is, a lot of people don't like to admit, or certainly in a business sense or enterprise, that China and the US are almost identical in their position when it comes to crypto. In that both are anti-ICO, but both are super pro blockchain. I don't mean just pro. these are literally leading companies when you compare them to even my country of Australia. We are really big proponents of blockchain too, but comparatively, from the empirical evidence, both China and the US are leading the way in terms of startups. So there's no question the government, even themselves, and even enterprise sectors and banking particularly, they're all working super hard to utilize these technologies. It's just that, once again, it's the mechanism for manipulation that they were really trying to control, or to prevent people from significant losses in that, the lay open market, because it's not really the case that it's the losses of the big businessmen that I care about. It's the case of, I use the analogy of my own dad, because if I don't ever want to not do due diligence, because it could be my own dad or someone I care about at that computer looking into that project and buying it based on information that, is less than adequate. And that often comes from access simply to be able to do that. And like you're saying, is that, ironically, I can access ICOs as an Australian, you as an American can't. That means that I've had to do even more due diligence. There's even more rested on my shoulders to make sure that if I'm going to invest in something, that I'm going to have to really be careful, because there's so much bullshit out there. So in some respects, you had a bit of a security blanket just by default.
Right. Absolutely. And listen, I get the other side of the debate. I get the people that are like, governments can't shut us down. We don't need the governments. They can't stop us. Screw them, essentially, and I hear you, but like, here's the thing, as this space grows, and as just the asset class and the market cap of the space grows, eventually, and the governments have already taken notice, obviously, but eventually we're going to have to deal with Washington and Shanghai, and there's going to have to, the path goes through them. You know what I mean? And it's, in my opinion, it's much better to have some sort of olive branch and cooperation. There's been talks by Coinbase and these other entities of coming up with, partnering with the government, right, with Congress, and coming up with an Internet Bill of Rights, that protects your data, your identity, and your content and things like that. To me, that's the kind of, now we're talking, that's the progressive stuff that can really send this thing into hyperdrive.
Exactly.
Rather than damn the man, you know what I mean?
Exactly, bro. And the thing is as well, Jeremy, is that when we talk about data, I guess the decision for the SEC to become involved, or for the propensity for that to happen, doesn't necessarily imply for centralized control of data. That's not necessarily the conversation of the future. It may not be that. It may be simply looking at means of governance to really ensure that there's regulations putting forward for this new wave of facilitation of how we as users can control our own data. So evidence is also being had in China. I don't think they are even trying to stifle that potential of autonomous control. But what they are trying to do is regulate it so that, again, losses aren't incurred from speculation. So it will be interesting to see, because at the end of the day, governments don't want to see losses incurred because of technological change. But at the same time, with the immutability inherent in our technologies, they're not going to stop it. They're literally not going to be able to. So it's about how do they work with it. I literally think they are trying to keep up with us.
They are, and I would say that's, if there's an issue in the States, is that most of them don't, they don't understand it. They're in their 70s or 80s, and it's Chinese to them. But they will eventually, when it comes, and it's not on the front burner right now either. We got our political issues here, but it will come to the front burner, and what they'll do is they'll figure out a way to tax it. They'll figure out a way where they can make money and they can collect revenue on it, and then they will, they will instill regulations that hopefully are beneficial and are healthy, and create some sort of parameters and boundaries where it could be a growth environment.
Right.
That's the ideal case.
And I think there are other countries already leading the way. It's not necessarily always the US either.
Right. Oh, sure.
Is that, for example, in Australia, there's means in which people can, literally engage in real world, I guess, value for their investments in each of these different utilities, in a sense that they can go and pay their bills, they can purchase different things, there's laws being passed or discussed right now. If you go across to Liechtenstein, they're looking at exchange laws right now, and there's so many different things going on. Look at Malta. I mean, there's a lot of like inherent innovations happening from the governmental position, and once that happens again, it should also allow for an influx in innovation. It should not stifle it. And that's when I think we'll really see some exciting bull runs. I really do think that these pieces of the puzzle are still being added to the beauty of blockchain. And once we see more of that completion of the matrix, we'll see more of the next wave of potential. But
that's an excellent point. Just to touch on that real quick, I don't think the U.S. is going to lead the way on this one. I think like the countries that you're mentioning will, the ones that see the potential, and the hope is that, you know, they open themselves up to blockchain. They create these healthy environments, right, for blockchain projects to come, be based there, grow there, and hopefully the other countries, the U.S., China, these bigger nations will see the fruit of it. They'll see, you know, sort of the blessing and the prosperity and what the fruit and what the results are, and they'll be like, oh man, we need to get on this.
I think they will, honestly.
Yes,
and
I do too.
I think that they are too intelligent as, you know, developed countries to not miss the boat, the blockchain boat, with regard to, and not just blockchain, obviously, just really the new ledger technology potential that's really there. I mean, it's so obvious to me that is there. I mean, this technology is not going away. It's just that, again, the reticence of some of these countries is actually potentially costing them serious money if they don't hurry up and pay attention. And that's why the ETF, I guess, news recently was interesting. Because again, I don't rely on news for my own decision. I think that's really crazy. But I think that it was a good indicator that there's more discussions at the top. You know, less of an immediate reaction, less of the, I guess, absolutes, and more of the, okay, what's the potential? Let's discuss this further. I like that narrative. It's a good indication that we're in a very healthy ecosystem now.
Yeah.